cutting a power line and saying you can power your house with no electricity, external electricity, run your car with a new engine that runs with no gasoline. We did a 60-second commercial nationwide. As far as we can tell, about 10 million people saw it. And after that happened, that was too much. That couldn't be tolerated. And so I got a letter from the state of California inviting me to come back to California to go to court. So I flew back from New Jersey to California to go to court, and when I walked into the court, the judge said, "You're probably wondering why you're here." And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, because I've been ordered by the state of California to put you in prison." And I said, "Well, that's really interesting. You're putting me in prison, but I've never been convicted of the crime. How do I go to prison without a trial and without being convicted?" And I said, "You can't do that, can you?" And he said, "Well," he says, "I've been ordered by the state of California to put you in prison, so that's where you're going, but sounds like you got a hell of a case for appeal." That, by the way, is a quote, and I do have the transcript. I walked out of prison 2 years ago, and now we have rebuilt our whole national network of distribution of distributors. We're in every state of the United States. We're in every major county of the United States. We have people now who understand exactly how the government works, exactly how the big boys work, exactly how the energy companies work. And we've got it all figured out, and we've got far, far, far more technology than we ever had in 1987. We got a lot more money than we ever had in 1987, and we're about to rock your world.
As if the amazing over-unity results of these pioneering inventions are not enough, a curious combination of side effects to free energy research involves such things as the transmutation of metals, the formation of new isotopes, and yes, even anti-gravity. Levitation effects from spinning magnetic disks conjure up images of UFOs hovering in midair. British inventor John Searle has led the way along these lines, but his technique is not the only approach. The remarkable works of Canadian inventor John Hutchison has drawn widespread attention from businessmen and government scientists since 1979, when he began using ultra-high electromagnetic frequencies to transform matter in some very unusual ways. It has come to be known as the Hutchison effect.
The objects you're seeing moving there is a form of levitation by translational movement, meaning that the objects become lighter and can float around. The heaviest being the barium cylinder that you see there with the two wires coming out of it. Tends to slide around on 7 pounds of its own weight. The physics of it is self-resonation of what they call ferromagnetic and piezoelectric barium type name through a power amplifier and broad and narrow bands of electrical energy going into this crystal. So the applications of this in advanced applications using free energy or zero-point energy to power it would be in propulsion technologies. This is a crystal converter unit that I made about a year ago to see if the principle worked, and indeed it seems to work to this day. The principles involve the Casimir effect and space charge type of barrier technology in semiconductors, and a jitter activity called zero-point energy that goes through time and space. The idea is to get the material inside this to interface with the jittering action of zero-point energy. And moving on to what they may look like inside, I actually bring out a piece here of this material, of common minerals and that, produced in a special way, and I take a reading here. And I should be getting a higher reading. I had a hot spot somewhere on here. I have here almost a half a volt, as you can see. As one can see, there's no batteries in this or anything else except just crystalline material with different configurations. And this is a steady state. It's always that, and has been tested up to a year's time and under stress tests also. So, which made me decide to then, of course, mount the same material in cylinders. Different cylinders, of course, there are different mixes in there, and I found that that some of the cylinders are not as powerful as this material here, or this very tiny one here. Actually, this has more power than this large artillery shell unit here. And what I want to do, of course, is to demonstrate it in the sense of it making actual power. That means to turn a small motor. Okay, I'm attaching this to the base here. Another lead at the top, and it should spin, which it does. So yeah, basically, this kind of material powering motors. Of course, it's a very small motor at this time, but scaled up in larger amounts of material can power up to several horsepower if needed.
Hutchison hopes his simple shake-and-bake method of producing these crystal energy converters will attract investors who can see the potential of permanent batteries which never need charging.
Non-toxic, that will interface with zero-point energy in space and time.
Hutchison's more dramatic experiments border on the paranormal and have generated more than just a passing interest from U.S. military research labs.
We've had about 750 demonstrations of levitations, translational movements, metallurgical samples falling apart, changing into transmuted unknown metals. Quite a variety of obscure types of effects, wood impregnated into metals, other objects in metals, monopole magnetic fields written up in many journals. Quite a host, or a Pandora's box, of different types of effects on the outer edge of the scientific community.
In this remarkable series of video clips shot by Hutchison, we see what happens when he fine-tunes the electromagnetic frequencies aimed at target objects in his garage.
On the subatomic level, I feel that there is a dimension shift activated by very conventional electrostatics, RF fields that I use, and Tesla waves that I use, that actually form a keyway that opens up another area of time and space that may activate the zero-point energy fields and interdimensional reactions, let's say, to gravitational waves and time waves, or chronons, if you wish. Perhaps we're dealing in chronons and gravitons, which are maybe particles, and somehow causing a distortion, which causes objects to simply break apart or pulsate in the center of stainless steel bars and fall apart, or to become weightless.
Here, ice cream in a plastic cup. Finally, a 70-pound cannonball.
interesting and also frustrating about his invention is that he's using a combination of Tesla coil and Van de Graaff to produce a very disruptive and lifting experiments, which in one case, for example, actually lifts a 19-pound bushing toward the ceiling just from electromagnetic fields. Now, when we analyze that, we find that there's position versus time graph that we can plot, and also the velocity versus time. But when we actually analyze the acceleration versus time, it's an increasing straight line. So we're forced as scientists to admit that we have a third derivative effect, which, for my mind, actually lends itself to an anomalous new force, which I call hyperforce, because we have to take a derivative of that to finally get a flat, straight line, a constantly increasing acceleration. So the Hutchinson effect has been used as a benchmark for a comparison to many other high-voltage propulsion devices. Electrogravity, in other words.
Now that we've witnessed the awesome potential of these revolutionary new energy sources, some interesting questions begin to surface. What are the consequences to the environment, to the very fabric of space-time itself, once we begin harnessing these little understood forces on a planetary scale? Remember the promise of nuclear energy, that electricity would be too cheap to meter? Are there downsides to tapping free energy that we may not be able to predict until it may be too late?
We have effects which can get down now into the very fundamental thing that drives everything, the mind stuff, the connection of the mind to the body and everything. For example, if you were to generate extreme pulses, extreme powerful pulses of this so-called scalar potential stuff with the hidden internal stuff, if you jerk that hard enough, you jerk the normal smooth flow of time stream, and what you really do is you snap the body loose from its mind connection. You jerk the two loose from each other. That's instantaneous death at every level. Every cell dies, every germ dies, every paramecium dies, every virus dies, the whole body dies. So obviously, if you're going to try to think of energy in those enormous amounts, you're going to have to be extremely careful. You can't do that just willy-nilly without risking terrible effects from it. So there are some limitations that will emerge on this technology.
There is a danger, however, that you may tap too much zero-point energy, and then, of course, these things would heat up and explode, which has happened a few times with these devices of mine. So, in essence, it's an interesting technology to get involved in, but I notice that there's some precautions one needs to take. If you're having too much drawing from the electromagnetic jitter of zero-point energy, you're going to get a minor meltdown. And I had to clean this area out here once because of a minor meltdown.
Would a new energy source be dangerous, for example? I would say, of course, you have to respect it. I mean, it's energy, so therefore, it's always potentially dangerous. It's double-edged. And I think it would take a healthy respect to investigate it. One should be cautious, and that's very reasonable. I've heard some good things. I've heard there could be health effects. There could be good effects as well as the potential for detrimental effects. I think it's like anything else. It's energy. It could be used for good. It could be used for bad. It's up to us.
Perhaps because of their traditional understanding of invisible forces like chi or ki, Oriental cultures, especially the techno-enthusiastic Japanese, embraced the concept of free energy. Well-respected scientists like Shinichi Seki and Seihuji Inomata are receiving substantial government and industry support.
Meanwhile, the Japanese, of course, are beginning to commercially develop various systems. For example, a Japanese consortium funds the Pones and Fleshman work. The Japanese Toshiba Corporation is working with Inomata, and various other corporations are coming together to develop free energy options. And of course, Japan has no vested interest in oil. They don't have any domestic source. So it's in their best interest to be the first kid on the block to make little gizmos that will replace our circuit breakers and internal combustion engines.
To understand this machine, you need, mind change, paradigm shift in yourself. So far, physics, ordinary science, consider only material world. But we should think another world as an unseen world. And we should recognize that unseen world and material world is connected. This energy comes from the other dimension.
We'll really have a true science when it is accepted in science, and a true technology when all the phenomenology is thoroughly worked out and thoroughly understood, when all the models are redone so that we adequately can model this theoretically and we can do engineering. We can sit down and design the circuits. They'll work every time. We'll have components on the shelf we can buy, assemble, and they work. We're not at that stage today. We are at a stage today which is the birth of the baby. We're not at the stage where it's already a teenager running around playing baseball on the baseball lot. We're at the birth of the baby, and the birth is very difficult because it's opposed by so many interests. The orthodox scientific community still very adamantly oppose it because they think that it's nonsense. They think that it's this old idea of perpetual motion in a closed system, creating energy from nothing. And that is nonsense. You can't do that. There are very strong and very powerful economic interests in the world, probably the strongest economic interest in the world, which are adamantly opposed to it. Can you see what this does to the oil-rich nations? Can you see eventually? Can you see what this will do to many things? Now, actually, what it'll do, you'll phase the oil. Petrochemical industry won't go away. You still need the oil for the materials that's in it and the chemicals. And so it'll be more and more petrochemical industry rather than keep burning and wasting the oil and putting all the pollutants in the biosphere. So many things will readjust. It's going to wrest control from a lot of the great wealthy control barons who now dominate largely the economic world. And their world is going to change. Now, what you're going to see, I would predict, and we'll see if history bears this out, when those barons really realize that this stuff is for real and it can be made to work, and with the internet and with free publishing and computers and everything, they can no longer contain the information. And it's very embarrassing to keep killing the inventors. They stopped that about 15 years ago. At some point, you're going to see an overwhelming availability of funds become available. When the funds become available, the scientists will change over into it because they go where the money goes. They're bought and paid for, simple as that. You can't do research unless you got the funds. You cut off the research grants, professor gets without a job. He leaves the university. And so science is simply bought and paid for in this country and much of the world. When the money goes, the science will go to it. Now that will put the sharp young graduate student on it finally with some funds to do the experiments and work on their doctorates and so forth. You will have a very rapid assimilation and advancement of a totally new and extended electromagnetic science at the time.
You get to a certain stage in scientific development, sometimes to stages where you're faced with problems and barriers and you sort of forced to rethink and go in different directions. I think we're seeing that one of those peculiar time periods in the history of science where we're going to overturn some cherished models, not too much, but make some changes, and they'll open the door to an enormous amount of new technology in electricity and magnetism, in nuclear reactions, in motor development, in battery applications, in space flight, in perhaps in anti-gravity. I think there are, in creating scarce elements from plentiful elements. I think we have just reached a plateau now where the world's door is opening to, what, a millennium of new science?
We're talking about real-life hardware. We're talking about experiments in science that are telling us beyond any reasonable doubt that we have technologies that will enable us to be free from the bondage that we now feel, free from some of these economic constraints that we've created for ourselves. Because you see, if energy is free, and it will be very shortly, food is free, housing is free, then we're free to create express our creative gifts and not be like drones. And we're also free to explore our greater selves. And it's going to be a very exciting time coming up.
The future of the world, as seen by conventional thinkers, or even many far-reaching thinkers, is tame compared to what cold fusion and free energy is going to do. No aspect of human culture will be untouched by this energy revolution. The very fact that the material that covers 70% of the planet's surface will now be available as a fuel source, and the fact that water makes up a huge percentage of our bodies, and this is a fuel and a source of energy, this is going to have incredible psychological and religious and historical and geopolitical implications. The Middle East picture and the strength of the oil interests there is going to be drastically altered. Air pollution will be abolished in most cities that are now affected by the internal combustion engine. And space travel, which is a favorite subject of mine, will be transformed. The ability to travel to the planets and to the stars will be given a gigantic boost, one that I never in my lifetime expected as an engineer who deals with those things.
Some people are saying that the title of my book, The Coming Energy Revolution, is a bit fearsome, that revolution implies a sudden radical change, and that the status quo will suffer, and that people whose jobs depend on the status quo will suffer. So perhaps evolution is a better way to look at it. But one way or another, our leaders, our political leaders, our business leaders, our utility company executives have to address the changeover to clean energy sources. And it'll probably come from abroad, so it probably will happen fairly fast. I'm not really concerned myself about a radical shift because people seem to be on the verge of readiness for change. A lot of fear, but also some positive anticipation. And maybe it takes an unraveling of what we have to put together a cleaner, more sane world.
Is mankind ready? Do we have the maturity to handle it? Are we giving matches to a baby? That's the question. Well, the first answer is we're kind of backing ourselves against the wall. If we maintain the status quo, we're doomed anyway. It looks like we're going to get a shot by having this energy available to us. If we're not mature enough to handle it, well, I guess we're doomed either way. We have a chance to survive, a chance to go on, but it will take, in a way, a consciousness transformation. Understand there's a consciousness movement and things like that, that people are starting to wake up. It's not just a me game now, it's a we game. And as we learn to work together and have empathy for one another, we can transcend the old selfish consciousness, which has caused all the problems and all the wars and everything else, into a recognition that we are a planetary being.
We've only been able to present a handful of inventors and their remarkable devices in this program. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people worldwide, scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, who are actively working right now, researching and developing this phenomenal technology to the point where it can be successfully scaled up and mass marketed. We are at a pivotal crossroads in human history. Can we as a society release our fears associated with the violence of the past and embrace the unknown? Can we cast aside our rigid skepticism in favor of an open-minded spirit of inquisitiveness? Our very survival may depend on how we answer these questions. We hope we've given you enough of the necessary information with which you may base your future decisions regarding this exciting new field, one that will soon affect all of our lives and the very fate of our planet Earth as well. I'll see you at the finish line. The race is on.